Falling down in the room around them are all of these dead bugs and insects, because what this is an advertisement for is earth, bug, and insect spray. And the one who's seated and is looking so beautiful, she's holding in her lap one of those old-fashioned pump sprayers. Okay, so these posters do have a lot of humor to them, which is one of the reasons I like them. And so just as things start to go downhill in Shanghai, just generally they also take a pretty bad turn for Pearl and May, who suddenly find themselves in arranged marriages on their way to the United States. We had a lot of arranged marriages in my family. My great-uncle, back in 1932, he took the family back to China on a buying trip. And you know, even today, you're on vacation, the dad will say, here's a little money, go buy a souvenir. My great-uncle, he didn't say that. What he said was, you know, as long as we're here, let's just get all you boys wives. And that's what they did. The oldest one was about 25, the youngest one was only 15. And these young women who in China had servants, once they came to the United States, they really became the servants, and they lived these very closed-in, very narrow lives. They didn't get out. They only got out for things like weddings, funerals, and one-month birthday parties. And so there are a couple of them still living today. They've been here, 70 years, and they may speak about 10 words of English. They just didn't get out. When Pearl and May come, their first stop is to Angel Island. Has anyone here heard of Angel Island? I love being back in California. Oh, God. So when I was back east, the first week I was in New York, Philadelphia, Long Island, and New Jersey. Not one single person had heard of Angel Island. So they, of course, all knew Ellis Island. We all know Ellis Island. And Ellis Island, when you think about it, was a pretty welcoming place. Yes, you had to answer a standard 20 questions. Yes, you went through the physical exam. Yes, there were moments of shame and embarrassment and humiliation. But overall, a welcoming place. How do we know? Because 1 out of every 3 Americans today can trace being here in the United States to a relative, an ancestor who came through Ellis Island. So basically a welcoming place. Angel Island opened for a completely different purpose. It wasn't welcoming at all. It had opened with the express purpose to keep the Chinese out. And this had grown out of the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 that had barred the immigration of all Chinese except for 4 categories: ministers, diplomats, students, and merchants. And there was only one of those that you could fake, being a merchant. And so the inspectors were looking for people who were coming over as fake merchants, paper merchants. But they were also looking for what were called paper sons. These were young men who in China had bought a piece of paper claiming that they were the son of a Chinese born in the United States, so therefore an American citizen. And if you're the son of an American citizen, no matter where you're born in the world, you're automatically a U.S. citizen. So they would buy this piece of paper that would allow them to come here. And so the inspectors at Angel Island were looking for those paper merchants, the paper sons, their wives, and their children. So when Pearl and May come, So instead of answering a standard 20 questions, as people did going through Ellis Island, the Chinese immigrants had to answer anywhere from between 200 and 1,000 standard questions. And these weren't easy questions, and just think about these just if you had to answer them right now. How many steps from your street to your front door? How many trees in front of your house? How many trees in front of the house 3 doors down? How many windows in the house across the street? These aren't easy questions. That's only 5 out of 200, 5 out of 1,000. So these aren't easy questions. They were designed to make people make mistakes so that they would be detained and interrogated week after week, sometimes as long as 2 years before people were deported back to China, committed suicide, or were finally allowed to land. So Pearl and May do land, and they make their way south to Los Angeles, Chinatown, and by this time it's 1938. Los Angeles in 1938 had 4 Chinatowns. One of them was called China City. China City, has anyone here heard of China City? Go to China City? No. Okay, but how about Alvera Street? Everybody knows Alvera Street. Well, Alvera Street was the creation of a woman named Christine Sterling, a Caucasian woman, who wanted to create an authentic Mexican marketplace. And if you've been there, you know that it's not terribly authentic, right? Okay, so now she turned her attention to creating this authentic Chinese city. It was 1 square block, surrounded by a miniature Great Wall, and inside it was built from the leftover sets from the filming of The Good Earth. So it wasn't terribly authentic, but it did have a certain amount of charm, and so people could go there and they could ride in rickshaws down the Passage of 100 Surprises. You could nibble on China burgers. You could go to the Chinese Junk Cafe and drink pirate grog, that very famous Chinese drink. And, you know, so it wasn't terribly authentic, but it did have a certain amount of charm, and I have a personal connection to China City. It was an ill-fated place. It burned after 1 year, was rebuilt, and then burned again 10 years later and closed for good. There was one building that survived that second fire, and it was into that building after China City closed that my grandparents and great-aunts and uncles moved the family's Chinese antique store. And it was a big store, actually sort of about this size but wider. And it had this big central aisle, and it was filled with all these big Chinese antiques. And along the sides were what had once been the little shops in China City, these little tiny rooms. And they had upturned eaves and other Chinese architectural elements. And so now when it was our family store, this room was for bronzes, the art room, the ceramics room, the room for textiles, one for scrolls and one for jewelry. But there were also these other little rooms sort of hidden in this building that had these kind of skeletal remains of China City. The old goldfish pond, the old wishing well. So this was a place that really meant a lot to me as a child. There isn't a single brick left of it today. It's been completely wiped off the map. And I wanted to write about it before it was off the map of memory. You know, that these people who had been children at China City are getting pretty old now, so I wanted to capture their stories before they were gone. And then finally, very quickly, one last piece of history was the confession program of 1957. This confession program was a government program that targeted very specifically, again, the Chinese. And what it asked was for people who had come here illegally as paper stuns to step forward and confess. And if they confessed, they would be given their legal U.S. citizenship. It was a kind of an amnesty program. And if you look at it that way, you think it sounds pretty good. Well, you know, it was the U.S. government, so there was some fine print attached in there. It wasn't enough just to step forward and confess about yourself. You also needed to rat out your friends, your neighbors, your business associates, even your own family members. And if you could say, oh, and by the way, I think he's a communist, for sure you would get your citizenship. This was something that ripped apart communities, destroyed families and businesses. It's something that even today people don't want to talk about. Scholars haven't written that much about it because there's still so much shame and embarrassment and guilt in the community. But as I said at the very beginning, I am a bit of a pest. And, you know, if you ever invite me over and I sit on your couch, just don't let it happen, because unless you want to tell me all your secrets, you know. So I did interview a woman in Washington, D.C. She was one of 5 children born in this country. And her father confessed. And then the week that he got his citizenship, they came and arrested his wife to deport her. And they fought for 8 years to keep her in the country. And, you know, in 1957, this was not a time that you wanted to be sent back to the People's Republic of China.